Have you ever felt a tightness in your chest upon hearing a simple phrase and realized, in that very second, that nothing would ever be the same again? Imagine a scene. An ordinary person walks down the street, hears a distant voice reciting an ancient phrase, a sentence that seems to have come from a forgotten time, and suddenly that person's inner world trembles. It's not just a passing emotion. It's as if something within awakens, a vigilance that was previously dormant. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you and change the way you watch over your spiritual life. What I call here Mother Mary's Code is not an esoteric mystery reserved for a select few, nor is it a magic formula. It is a combination of words, images, and repetitions, phrases that appear in the messages, phrases that echo in Medjugorje and in conversion traditions, that, when heard or repeated attentively, activate an inner state of spiritual vigilance. These key phrases are not frightening in themselves. They nudge the conscience so that the person awakens from automatic thinking and returns to living with purpose, prayer, and discernment. Have you ever experienced this? Perhaps it was a verse, a piece of advice from an elderly person, or even a refrain heard in prayer that touched something profound. Throughout this video, I'll show how small expressions can generate big changes, how simple words linked to the unrevealed messages of Medjugorje can act as triggers, leading to practical conversion, sincere repentance, and vigilant prayer that transforms everyday choices. I'm not talking about scares or emotional manipulation. I'm talking about signs that produce real fruit, calm, coherence with faith, and actions that reflect a life focused on love and spiritual responsibility. The goal here is not to create fear, but to ignite loving attention, a guard of the heart that protects and guides. You might be thinking, but can a phrase really do this? Yes, and I'll prove it with stories that show the before and after. Simple accounts of people who, upon hearing a word or phrase, changed their habits, resumed prayer, and found a new way to watch over their souls. Stay with me until the end, because I'll also teach you how to recognize when a phrase is the fruit of emotional manipulation and when it's a true call to conversion. Discernment is an essential part of this process. Not every word that moves us comes from the Spirit. Therefore, we need to learn to distinguish authentic signs from those that merely provoke fear or empty curiosity. As you listen to the phrases I'll present, notice your body and your inner reaction. Breathe, observe, and if something touches your heart, write it down. These words have a way of recording themselves in your memory and returning at the right time, like reminders that guide your spiritual life. In the next section, I'll begin to reveal concrete examples of this code, phrases that activate spiritual vigilance, why they work, and how they can be incorporated into a daily practice of prayer and vigilance. Prepare yourself for a journey that blends history, testimony, and practice, and that can change the way you live your faith. And before we move on, I want to ask you something sincerely. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most. A phrase that touched your heart, an experience in which you felt that inner vigilance awaken, or even a question that arose while listening. Sharing your story isn't just a personal gesture. When you write, others read it, recognize it, and find the courage to resume the practice of prayer and discernment. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. And, honestly, it's also what motivates me to delve deeper into the stories, the messages of Medjugorje, and the practices that truly work in everyday life. If this video resonates with you, like it now. A simple like helps spread this message to those who need to hear a word that awakens their soul. And if you feel like following this journey of spiritual vigilance, subscribe. That way, I know I need to bring more videos with testimonies, code phrases, and practical exercises for all of us. It's not just an algorithm, it's a community. It's people helping each other. It's someone reading your comment on the day you need it most. It's a light that reaches where it might not reach alone. Now, getting back to our path within this code, we move on to concrete examples, and I want you to be with me, attentive to what touches your chest and ready to take note. Medjugorje. The name alone carries a mysterious weight for those interested in prophecies and signs that seem to come from a place beyond the visible. Deep in Bosnia and Herzegovina, a small village became the center of worldwide attention in 1981. When 6 young people claimed to have seen the Virgin Mary, they were just teenagers, living a simple village routine, when suddenly they were enveloped by something that would change not only their lives, but the fate of thousands of pilgrims. What happened that summer is not confined to the past. It continues to resonate to this day, fueling one of the longest and most controversial stories of Marian apparitions in history. These 6 visionaries, now adults, report that the apparitions have not stopped. Over the years, they have received messages that speak of conversion, prayer, fasting, and an urgent call to spiritual vigilance. But there is something even more enigmatic. They claim that each of them was entrusted with 10 secrets, and that some of these secrets concern the future of the world, events that will occur and will have a great spiritual and human impact. So far, only a portion of the messages are regularly released to the public, but the so-called 7 unrevealed messages remain hidden, like pieces of a puzzle that has not yet been assembled for all to see. This is why Medjugorje arouses so much curiosity and at the same time so much resistance. Some see it as a clear sign from heaven, a reminder to transform our mindset and return to God with determination. Others question whether all this is real or simply the fruit of popular devotion. This tension between faith and doubt creates a fertile space for each of us to ask profound questions. What do these messages hide? What lies behind the silence about these secrets? And above all, why haven't these revelations yet been fully delivered to the world? This waiting has a purpose. Many scholars and priests who follow the phenomenon affirm that the messages have an order, a sequence of revelations that can only be fulfilled at the right time. This is not cheap curiosity or sensationalism. It is a journey of preparation. This time of waiting is like a school, a process in which each person is called to be vigilant, to adjust their daily decisions, and to align their life with what is essential. This is the central point of spiritual vigilance, being awake to perceive the signs, understand their impact on our personal history, and position ourselves before them. When studying the history of Medjugorje, it's impossible not to notice how these messages intersect with other apparitions and with Christian tradition itself. There's a common thread that runs through Fatima, Lourdes, and other manifestations, always with the same call: conversion, prayer, reconciliation. This repetition isn't accidental. It's part of a pattern, almost like a code, a constant reminder that the time for distraction is over and the time for decision is now. Each phrase, each image seems chosen to awaken the sleeping heart, to pull someone back to the path, to inspire real change. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we understand the background of Medjugorje, we begin to realize that it is not just an isolated religious event, but a spiritual plot that shakes mindsets, challenges our priorities, and reveals hidden truths that were hidden in the shadows. It's as if the backstage of history is being revealed little by little, calling each of us to participate in something greater than life itself. This call to vigilance is not for others. It is for you and me, here and now. It asks us to look within, to ask uncomfortable questions, and to have the courage to change what needs to be changed. This journey is made of small choices: waking up 5 minutes earlier to pray, letting go of a habit that keeps us from peace, paying attention to what we feel when we hear a phrase that seems to touch the depths of our soul. These are seemingly simple decisions, but they build a solid path of preparation. And it is precisely this preparation that prepares us to understand the meaning of the messages, even those that have not yet been revealed. I want you to feel the weight of this story, not as a burden, but as an invitation. Imagine the impact of being one of the first people to understand that these messages are not just warnings for the future, but a roadmap for transforming your life now. When you connect these revelations to your daily life, you realize that spiritual vigilance is not a state of tension, but rather of awakened consciousness, a way of living with an attentive heart, ready to act and to love. Comment below. This makes sense to me, so I know you're walking along in this reflection, and so other people who read it feel like they're not alone in this quest. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. When we speak of Mother Mary's code, we are pointing to something seemingly simple yet powerful in practice. Words, images, and repetitions that act as spiritual triggers. It's not nebulous mysticism or an emotional trick. It's a real mechanism of inner transformation that acts on the mind, heart, and daily decisions. Think of phrases as seeds. They contain a condensed meaning that, when sown repeatedly in the soil of our mind and heart, begins to take root. Prayer habits, renewed attention, a different way of seeing life. This process has an impact because it shifts our mindset. It changes small routines and, little by little, reorders priorities. The hidden truth behind this code lies not in magic words, but in the memory and attention they evoke. When a phrase is repeated, whether in an apparition, a popular prayer, or a personal meditation, it gains a weight that goes beyond mere information. It becomes a mental marker, a reminder that triggers an inner response: silence, repentance, gratitude, courage to change. This is the key to what we call spiritual vigilance, a state of consciousness that depends not only on intense emotions, but on small internal prompts that guide us to make decisions aligned with faith. Imagine a life where, upon hearing a single word, your attitude changes instantly. An impulse to forgive arises, a decision to abandon a harmful habit, the courage to seek reconciliation. This doesn't happen by chance. The code phrases work like neural shortcuts, repetitions that shape attention pathways in the brain. By associating a phrase with a concrete practice, a gesture of humility, a moment of silence, an act of charity, we create a circuit that facilitates new responses. This is why daily practice is so important, not to transform by decree, but to allow the hidden truth to become visible in everyday choices. In the case of Medjugorje, these phrases often appear linked to images and symbols that echo throughout Christian tradition: invitations to prayer, calls to fast, appeals to reconciliation. Each of these expressions has a different effect depending on the person receiving it. For some, it will be a call to immediate conversion. For others, a gentle alarm that reminds them of the need for vigilance. What matters is perceiving the real impact they provoke: a change in mindset, urgency in decisions, a desire to live more coherently. It's like tuning an instrument. Small, consistent corrections create harmony. When we say that the code activates vigilance, we don't mean that it creates paranoia or permanent fear. On the contrary, phrases that truly awaken the soul produce fruits of peace, clarity, and responsible action. They invite transformation without imposition, suggest a new mindset that prioritizes the essential, and open space for a journey of faith that is both intimate and communal. And this is where the power of repetition comes in. The healthier the repetition, rooted in prayer, spiritual reading, and practices that bear fruit, the greater the likelihood that this vigilance will become a lifestyle and not just an emotional high. The behind-the-scenes nature of this process is both interesting and humanly understandable. Behind a phrase that inspires, there's always a context, a vulnerable person, a moment of searching, a community praying together. It's this web of relationships and intentions that gives words strength. When phrases circulate in environments of prayer and care, they become more than just sounds. They become signs that point to concrete decisions: reconciling with someone, looking compassionately at others, revising habits that deviate from love. The revelation isn't just the phrase itself, but how it finds fertile ground in real life. There is another layer worth noting: discernment. Not every expression that moves is necessarily an authentic code. Some phrases provoke a momentary reaction without producing change. Others can be used manipulatively. Therefore, the true code is distinguished by its fruits. It produces calm, generates coherence with the tradition of faith, and leads to actions that edify. Learning to recognize this difference is part of vigilance itself. It is filtering revelations through the lens of truth, humility, and practical love. By integrating these phrases into our daily lives, we discover a new logic of spiritual practice. The code functions as a map that suggests paths, but the real journey is made with small decisions, choosing prayer over reclining before the world, opting for reconciliation over pride, putting charity before comfort. These decisions, repeated, build a trajectory of transformation that over time reveals new truths and also reveals the deeper meaning of the messages we receive. And if all this sounds distant, remember that most change begins with tiny things. A phrase that wakes us at dawn, a gesture we habitually truncate, and that, when replaced by an act of love, changes our routine. Vigilance then ceases to be an abstract concept and becomes a life discipline, shaping a mindset that prioritizes the essential over the ephemeral. With each step, we learn more about the revelations and about ourselves, and we realize that the impact of these words extends far beyond the moment we hear them. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic and show how, in practice, we can recognize these phrases and integrate them without giving in to exaggeration or sensationalism. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. When we speak of the key phrases that make up this code of Mother Mary, we are not faced with a dry catalogue of words, but rather with signals that activate distinct inner reactions, each with a role in transforming mindsets and daily decisions. There are expressions that ignite the conscience like a lamp turning on in a dark room, others that pave the way for sincere repentance, some that guide vigilant prayer, and still others that push toward a practical conversion, visible in actions. The important thing is not to memorize a list, but to understand the effect each type of phrase provokes. The impact is both psychological and spiritual, a hidden truth that gradually reveals itself. When one listens carefully, consider a simple phrase many have heard in contexts of apparition or prayer, a summons that says something like repent and pray. To someone distracted by routine, this phrase may seem like just another piece of advice. However, when repeated in moments of silence and combined with concrete practices, it acts as a trigger. It creates a burst of attention that leads to a small, immediate decision, such as opening the Bible, kneeling for 5 minutes, or asking someone for forgiveness. These micro-decisions taken together produce transformation. Our mindset is recalibrated. What was once a fleeting priority begins to be evaluated in a different light, and everyday choices begin to reflect a new coherence. There are also phrases that touch directly on the realm of repentance, phrases that don't condemn, but rather expose an intimate truth with affection and firmness. When heard by someone already carrying a burden, they can provoke an immediate inner movement. The person remembers a mistake, feels the necessary discomfort, and finds the courage to make amends. This is where the dynamics of habit come into play. Repeating a simple request for repentance in community or private prayer gradually opens the space for humility to become practical. And transformation happens because repetition creates a safe circuit in the mind, where admitting fragility ceases to be shameful and becomes a path to liberation. Other phrases authorize prayerful vigilance, invitations to daily attention, silence, and listening. These expressions don't call for intense emotions. They ask for discipline. Getting up 10 minutes earlier, making a quick examination of conscience at the end of the day, combining silence with a concrete gesture of love. The effect is cumulative. Each small moment of vigilant prayer sharpens the spiritual senses and helps distinguish between fleeting emotions and true callings. The hidden truth here is that vigilance is not a continuous state of anguish, but a practice that generates peace and clarity, an inner change that translates into decisions that align life and faith. And then there are those phrases that inspire practical conversion, that push a person to take visible actions in the world, reconciling with someone, adopting a behavioral change at work or in their family, dedicating time to community service. When a word finds its way into a routine already prepared to listen, the impact is practical and immediate. This happens because the phrase acts as a map. It doesn't provide ready-made answers, but rather points the way. From there, the person makes concrete decisions, achieves small victories, and sees the real impact on their own life and the lives of those around them. It's applied transformation, changing habits and relationships. In practice, it's crucial to understand the underlying mechanisms of this mechanism. The context in which a phrase is received, whether a moment of community prayer or personal silence in the face of suffering, speaks volumes about the strength of its effect. A repeated expression in an environment of trust and discernment tends to bear fruit, while the same phrase used sensationally may generate only fleeting excitement. Therefore, part of the skill of those seeking spiritual vigilance is learning to read the scene, understanding when the phrase is pointing to authentic revelation, when it is a catalyst for responsible action, and when it is merely emotional noise. This discernment is part of the mindset that vigilance itself aims to build. From a human perspective, there's also a neurological and habituated aspect. Repeated words create pathways in the brain. Practices associated with these words cement new responses. Thus, the combination of phrase and action is what transforms something abstract into a habit. For example, a phrase that reminds us of the importance of forgiveness, when accompanied by a weekly reconciliation exercise, has a much greater chance of producing lasting changes than if it were to dwell solely on the emotion of the moment. This is how a journey of transformation is built, through small, intentionally repeated choices that gradually reshape our lives. And because this isn't automatic, community and tradition play a decisive role. Prayers, chants, and group repetitions amplify the effect of the phrases, creating a favorable environment for vigilance to flourish. Behind the scenes, what happens is a synergy between personal intention and community practice. Together, faces and stories make the words more vivid and the revelations more tangible. At the same time, the story of Medjugorje reminds us that these dynamics are nothing new. For centuries, simple words in sacred contexts have produced profound movements of conversion. At the same time, individual responsibility cannot be delegated. Receiving a sentence is just the beginning. It is up to each person to transform this reception into concrete decisions. And this is where vigilance reveals itself as an exercise in freedom. It is not an obligation, it is a choice. Choose a more attentive life, a mindset that prioritizes the essential and decisions that have a real impact on relationships and witness. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, and in the next few sections, we'll identify concrete examples of phrases and how they apply to real people's daily lives, not as a curiosity, but as a practical map of transformation. Comment below, this makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And to make this concrete, I want to tell you two stories that show, behind the scenes of real life, how a phrase or a vision can enter someone's routine and provoke a transformation of mindset and decisions that reverberates in their daily lives. The first is about a woman named Anna, name changed for discretion, but the story is true in spirit. Anna lived a routine of apparent religiosity. She attended her parish, knew prayers and knew verses by heart, but there was a distance between her practice and her heart. At home, the worries of work and family consumed her. Faith had become, for her, a functional habit with no real impact on her choices. On a short pilgrimage, she sat silently in a chapel and heard, From someone praying nearby, a simple phrase, "Look at what you're leaving behind." In that moment, it wasn't a sermon or a word of blame. It was a summons that touched a hidden truth within her. He felt a tightness in his chest, like something you might have known before, a mixture of surprise, regret, and clarity. The effect wasn't explosive or dramatic. In the following days, Anna began to notice small cracks. The time she gave her family, the excuses she used to avoid visiting a sick relative, the rush that made meals rushed and without presence. The phrase acted like a mirror she couldn't avoid. Little by little, that small memory began to resurface in her daily life, when preparing dinner, when planning the day, in conversations with her children. Instead of provoking, paralyzing guilt, the phrase prompted simple decisions. A phone call she had postponed, a Sunday set aside for a walk with her family, one less excuse not to forgive. Without much drama, Anna's mindset shifted. She stopped living on autopilot and began choosing intentionally. The transformation was gradual, made up of small victories. The impact was profound, fostering a new attitude toward faith, now rooted in concrete action. The second story is about Carlos, a man who for years had declared himself skeptical about apparitions and signs. He worked in administrative roles, had a pragmatic routine, and believed spirituality was something intimate, reserved for private moments. One night, however, after a conversation with a colleague who was going through a period of grief, Carlos attended a prayer meeting for solidarity. There, during a moment of silence, he heard a short, direct phrase, "To watch is also to protect." This short, seemingly obvious expression penetrated a layer he had refused to enter, the idea of active responsibility for the lives of others. The next day, something inside him awakened. He noticed an isolated neighbor, remembered a friend who had distanced himself, and felt a calling to make decisions that involved presence and care. Carlos didn't become an overtly religious person overnight, but the phrase triggered a journey of practical transformation. He began making time in his schedule for visits, organized a small group to help people in need in the neighborhood, and incorporated simple habits of community vigilance. The impact was twofold. It changed his own mindset about what it means to care and generated visible effects in the community. The revelation there was not only spiritual, but practical, a hidden truth that, when brought to light, reoriented priorities and decisions. These examples illustrate how key phrases act in layers. First, they touch a person's feelings. Then they present the possibility of change. And finally, they demand concrete decisions. The process is more like a journey than a single event. There is an instant of awakening, but what determines whether it becomes a transformation is intentional repetition, the building of habits that sustain the new mindset. The phrase makes the call. The person responds with small actions. And over time, the sum of these actions produces an impact that is measured not only in emotion, but in choices and tangible effects on the lives of those around them. Ultimately, what these voices activate is a kind of mindful attention, a state in which we clearly see the consequences of our decisions. We often live trapped in routines that numb our conscience, and so Mother Mary's code works as a trigger, not to punish, but to awaken the freedom to decide for what truly matters. When vigilance is accompanied by humble practices, a moment of prayer, a gesture of reconciliation, a concrete act of service, the result is a more stable and sustainable transformation. It's also worth noting that not all testimonies follow the same rhythm. For some, change is rapid. For others, it's slow and sometimes painful. But there's a pattern. Whenever the phrase finds willing ground, a sincere intention, a supportive community, a sustained practice, the fruits appear. Inna's and Carlos's stories are microcosms of this dynamic. Small acts that produce big effects, shifts in mindset that reconfigure decisions, revelations that manifest behind the scenes of everyday life. And while these are singular stories, they point to a greater truth. Spiritual vigilance isn't far from real life. It manifests itself in conversations, decisions, and concrete care. Seemingly simple phrases can be maps for true transformation, as long as the choices align with the awakened sensitivity. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject and provide practical examples of specific phrases and exercises you can apply today to begin translating this vigilance into real decisions. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject and talk about something that often confuses many people on the journey of spiritual vigilance. How to distinguish a phrase that truly activates a call to conversion from one that merely provokes a fleeting emotional shock. The difference is subtle for those just starting to pay attention, but crucial for those who desire true transformation, because not every immediate impact means lasting fruit. There's a lot of empty hype circulating, and the hidden truth often reveals itself only to those who have the patience to observe the behind-the-scenes aspects of their own lives. Therefore, I will offer practical and simple criteria for you to learn to discern more confidently, using a blend of spiritual sensitivity and human common sense. The first criterion I always recommend is calm as a signal. When a phrase is authentic and accompanied by grace, it produces an inner peace that remains even after the initial emotion. This calm is not indifference. It is a serenity that helps you make wise decisions. If upon hearing a message you feel panic, paralyzing anxiety, and a disordered impulse, there is a good chance it is an emotional trick or a distorted interpretation. Spiritual tradition knows this difference well. Authentic signals usually generate consolation, clarity, and courage to act, not confusion or coercion. Observe. After the impact, does your heart feel lighter or more burdened? The answer usually indicates the source of the signal. Second, consider the fruits. Every message worth producing translates into tangible actions, more sincere prayer, acts of charity, reconciliation with others, concrete changes in daily decisions. If the phrase only captivates sentiment and doesn't change anything in practice, it may be operating in the realm of spectacle, not transformation. The coherence of the fruits is a good barometer. An authentic revelation generates positive impacts on personal and community life, not just likes and comments on social media. Healthy spirituality translates into ethics, more just relationships, and edifying choices. The third criterion is coherence with faith and tradition. Messages that dialogue with Scripture, with the great signs of Christian tradition, and with the magisterium without fundamentally contradicting them, are more likely to be legitimate. This does not mean that every new meaning must have immediate formal authorization, but that the direction of the message must not contradict the fundamental pillars of faith: love, humility, mercy, and truth. Be wary of phrases that promise exclusive privileges, that incite hatred, or that suggest a path that violates human dignity. Theological and communal verification is a prudent remedy against deception. A fourth aspect is the call to practical conversion. The most powerful phrases rarely remain abstract. They invite concrete decisions: forgiving someone, changing a habit, dedicating time to prayer, helping a neighbor. If the message is limited to sensationalist predictions or catastrophic scenarios without offering a path to personal response, it's important to maintain a critical distance. Genuine vigilance produces freely assumed responsibility, not paralyzing fear. Think of the message as a script that suggests actions, and evaluate whether the proposed actions promote life, healing, and communion. Another criterion I recommend is the test of time. True summonses usually stand the test of time. They maintain their ability to guide and pacify even after repeated reflection and prayer. If after the initial fervor has passed, the phrase completely loses its practical meaning and leaves only doubts, perhaps it was more of a temporary effect than a revelation. Patience is a valuable tool of discernment. Waiting prayerfully and following the unfolding effects helps to separate what is lasting from what is ephemeral. Trusted authority also matters. Placing the reception of a phrase within a community context with pastoral or spiritual guidance greatly reduces the risk of manipulation. It's not necessary to seek approval for everything, but sharing with trusted people, a spiritual director, a pastor, a mature prayer group, helps one recognize inconsistencies and integrate the experience in a healthy way. Personal discernment works best when supported by a living tradition that understands the classic signs of the Spirit. Also, pay attention to the relational effect. An authentic message tends to bring people together, generate acts of service, and promote reconciliation. If the phrase generates divisions, fanaticism, or entangles people in webs of fear and exclusion, this is a warning sign. True vigilance expands the community that loves. Emotional trickery isolates, inflames, and exploits. Therefore, always consider who benefits from this message. What kind of behaviors does it encourage in practice? The answer is revealing. We cannot forget the criteria of prayerful practice and examination of conscience. The method of ancient spiritual masters, such as Saint Ignatius, teaches us to distinguish consolation and desolation, inner signs that help us understand whether an experience comes to strengthen faith or to confuse. A simple daily examination of conscience helps us evaluate how messages influence our inner self. Do they bring a desire for union with God or merely uneasiness? Do they generate humility or spiritual pride? Humble responses oriented toward the common good point to authenticity. Ego-centered reactions suggest manipulation. Finally, remember that discernment is not an exact science, but an art learned through experience. We won't always have complete security. Therefore, prudence is a friend of faith. Cultivating a mindset of humble listening, seeking signs in the fruits, and making responsible decisions are steps that build a solid practice of vigilance. Avoiding sensationalism, favoring community, and testing consistency with tradition are attitudes that preserve truth and love for one's neighbor. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. And next, we'll look at concrete examples of phrases and how to apply them in practical exercises to transform everyday decisions. Comment below, this makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject and transform all this theory into concrete practice, because spiritual vigilance grows when words and gestures become part of routine, when transformation ceases to be an idea and becomes a habit. Think of it as a short 7-day journey, not a regimen of overcoming, but a gentle and sustainable journey to test, feel, and integrate Mother Mary's code into your life without extremes. The proposal is simple. Short daily readings, a memory phrase that activates attention, an exercise of silence or light fasting when possible, and a practical gesture of service or reconciliation that sets decisions in motion. Thus, your mindset changes from within, and the impact appears in the choices you make throughout the day. On the first day, start gently. Set aside 5 minutes upon waking for a short reading. It could be a verse, a phrase from the messages, or a familiar prayer, and choose a short phrase to repeat mentally throughout the day, something like, "To watch is to love." Write it down on your phone or write it down on paper and place it where you'll see it often. This small reminder acts as a trigger that draws your attention to what's essential. On the second day, keep your morning reading and add an examination of conscience at the end of the day. For 3 minutes, ask yourself where you've let your attention wander and what small decision could correct that deviation. Make a real decision before bed, for example, sending a message of forgiveness or scheduling a visit. On the third day, introduce a 10-minute moment of silence. It doesn't have to be a complex meditation. Just sit, breathe, and listen. Allow the chosen phrase to resonate slowly and observe what it brings: memories, desires for change, or recognitions. Silence serves as a fertile field in which the code begins to germinate. It is behind the scenes of silence that revelations often reveal themselves most clearly. On the fourth day, practice a symbolic fast. Replace an impulse to consume a television series, a small purchase, or an hour of social media with an act of prayer or service. Use this space to take action on someone's behalf, call someone in need, offer simple help, or perform an act of kindness. These small decisions show how mindfulness transforms everyday habits. On the 5th day, connect with your community, join a prayer group, attend Mass, or simply talk to someone who cultivates a solid spiritual life. Sharing experiences and listening to testimonies helps calibrate discernment and avoid emotional traps. Tradition and coexistence are precious resources for validating the impact of phrases and keeping the journey anchored in truth. On the 6th day, do a practical review. Review the decisions you made during the week, see what worked, what was difficult, and where there was resistance. Real transformation requires honesty about progress and setbacks. Celebrate small advances and adjust decisions without punishing yourself for failures. Finally, on the 7th day, translate the experience into a gesture of commitment. Choose a practice you will maintain. 5 minutes of daily reading, a recurring memory phrase, a monthly visit to someone in need, and commit to this decision for a month. Conscious repetition is what creates lasting pathways in the mind and heart. Over the course of these 7 days, observe the evolution of your mindset. Perhaps at first, vigilance may seem like an effort, but over time, it begins to influence decisions more naturally. The secret is to associate the phrase with concrete behavior. Without action, the word sounds pretty in the mind, but lacks impact. When you connect the memory of the phrase to an action, forgiving, visiting, praying, letting go of something, a cycle of change is created that strengthens the soul and redirects habits. The hidden truth revealed in this process is that conversion doesn't need to be dramatic to be profound. Small decisions, repeated with intention, reshape life. It's also important to remember that each person will respond differently. For some, the transformation will be visible in a few weeks. For others, it will be a journey of months. What matters is consistency and self-kindness throughout the journey. Avoid comparing your pace with others. Vigilance is both personal and communal. It requires individual courage and mutual support. Behind the scenes of this practice, there are always tests of patience, adjustments, and revelations that appear when we least expect it, often coming as simple suggestions while washing the dishes or walking down the street. Another essential layer is the cautious use of social media and information. Not every phrase circulated in posts or videos bears real fruit. Therefore, choose reliable sources, traditional prayers, and guidance from people of mature faith when incorporating something new. Community and pastoral authority are filters that help protect your heart from the traps of sensationalism. Still, don't underestimate the power of a simple phrase or a deeply moving image. The impact often happens exactly where we least expect it, in discreet conversations or silent readings that find the vulnerable point of our pride and pave the way for the courage to change. The journey I propose here is not an inventory of duties, but an invitation to experience a different way of living, a mindset guided by decisions that place love and responsibility at the center. By integrating short readings, repetition of phrases from memory, reflective silence, small symbolic fasts, and concrete gestures of service, you build an environment where vigilance flourishes without anguish and with fruit. Each day is a piece of this mosaic of transformation, and the impact will manifest in relationships, priorities, and the quality of choices. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, and below, I'll present practical examples of specific code phrases and targeted exercises for each, so you can start using these tools for change today. Comment below, I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because, ultimately, learning Mother Mary's code matters today in a practical and urgent way. It gives us clues to transform our mindset and the decisions we make in our daily lives. And it is these small choices that, combined, produce a real impact on personal and community life. When vigilance ceases to be a distant concept and becomes a habit, we begin to see revelations unfold not as spectacles, but as guides to acting with love and responsibility. Think of it as a hidden truth that ceases to be a mystery and becomes a map that shows paths of conversion, gestures of reparation, and attitudes that prioritize the common good over immediate comfort. This is the big difference between being moved by a phrase and truly transforming. The first is a reaction. The second is a journey. And this journey requires attention to the behind-the-scenes aspects of life, to the small sacrifices, the daily readings that attune us, the silences that teach us to listen, because transformation doesn't happen like a flash. It blossoms when we cultivate the right soil. Therefore, it is essential to understand that Mother Mary's code does not promise easy solutions, but rather invites a routine of construction, short readings that trigger reflection, memorized phrases that serve as prayer reminders, fasting or silence exercises that eliminate excess, and daily acts of charity that consolidate change. When these practices are repeated with intention, mindsets are reshaped, priorities shift, relationships heal, and previously impulsive decisions begin to reflect discernment and coherence with faith. This practice transforms the distracted individual into someone present, capable of seeing the effect of their choices on the lives of others. And it is precisely this unfolding that lends credibility to the phrases and messages. It is no coincidence that throughout the history of apparitions and spiritual renewal movements, the words that endure most are those that guide practical conversion. They ask for silence when there is too much noise. They ask for forgiveness when there is pride. They ask for service when there is selfishness. And when we receive one of these phrases, even if simply in the midst of everyday life, the challenge is to test its fruit. Does the phrase make us less anxious or more courageous? Does it lead us to ask for forgiveness or justify our mistake? Does it bring us closer to the community or isolate us in self-sufficiency? These questions help us read the signal prudently. At the heart of this exercise, there is also a psychological aspect that is important to recognize. Deliberate repetition shapes neural pathways that facilitate new responses. In other words, it is not spiritual magic, but human practice guided by grace. Words and actions together reconfigure habits and promote lasting change. This is why community structures, such as prayer groups and training sessions, are so valuable. They offer a context where phrases gain consistency and the fruits can be witnessed by others, preventing isolated experiences from becoming erratic interpretations. Behind the scenes of this dynamic, there is always a web of relationships and intentions, people who pray together, leaders who patiently guide, testimonies that encourage and correct, and it is this web that sustains transformation. When vigilance is practiced together, the impact multiplies. Individual actions resonate through networks of care and solidarity. And this is how the message ceases to be merely intimate and becomes missionary in small, everyday gestures. At the same time, there is a personal responsibility that cannot be delegated. Receiving a sentence is the beginning, not the guarantee. It is up to each person to translate what has been heard into concrete decisions, choosing to forgive, opting for silence instead of criticism, dedicating time to those in need. And this is the measure that allows us to distinguish between a fleeting effect and true transformation. Still, we know that the path is not linear. There will be setbacks, doubts, and days of dryness. Grace often comes through persistence, through humble repetition, not through spectacular revelation. That's why small daily practices are so essential. 5 minutes of morning reading, a nightly examination of conscience, a phrase from memory that serves as an anchor throughout the day, a symbolic fast that makes room for prayer, a gesture of service that frees us from selfishness. These simple decisions build a new mindset and promote an impact that, though subtle, is powerful. And when we talk about impact, we're not just talking about individual well-being, but about relational transformation, families that rebuild, Communities that learn to care, people who discover meaning amidst confusion. This is the kind of result that legitimizes investment in the code. It's not spiritual efficiency per se, it's transformation with a human face. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the way we apply the phrases in practice can vary, and in the following sections, I'll show concrete examples of phrases from the code and exercises designed for each one, so you can experiment without falling into exaggeration or sensationalism, adapting the practices to your routine and pace. Vigilance, when practiced well, is protection that springs from love, not a paralyzing fear, but a caring attention. In the next video, I'll reveal the 3 most powerful phrases and how to use them flawlessly. Comment below, this resonates with me. If you've stuck around this far, thank you for joining me in this conversation. It already says a lot about your desire to live with more mindfulness and purpose. If this content brought any meaning to your life, if you want to try any of the practices we discussed, subscribe to the channel. Here I'll continue to share practical tools, testimonials, and small routines that truly help with daily transformation. It's a space designed for those who want to act, not just feel. If something truly touched you, write "I'm with you until the end" in the comments, so I know you've made it this far, and so others know they're not alone in this journey. A simple gesture like this helps build community and gives courage to those just starting out. If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a like. It's not just a number. It's a sign that this type of content is valuable and should continue. It also helps me know which topics to explore further and how to make these messages increasingly practical and accessible. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click it and follow along if you want to see practical examples of the phrases and guided exercises I promised. I'd love to see you in the next conversation and continue this journey together with calm, courage, and responsibility.